Ever since I was a kid, a vast majority of the fighting games I played were developed by a company best known for blue robots, slow-moving zombies, and devilish action games. And with their 30-plus year experience in the game industry, Capcom has some undeniable classics under their belt. But that's not what we're here to discuss, dear viewer. For today's adventure, I've decided to go down the rabbit hole of Capcom's more grisly and less fondly remembered fighting game output. There are plenty of weird fighting games that Capcom has been involved with over the years, but today's main course is one that I've actually never played before. This is a fighting game with a seemingly non-existent positive reception, and many friends of mine who have played this game have said nothing but bad things about it to me. Okay, I'll quit it with the creepy music. Released in arcades and at home on the PS2 and Xbox, 2004's Capcom Fighting Jam, or Evolution if you're an American, oddly has all the qualities of a fantastic fighting game. A character roster composed of multiple Capcom IPs, a 2-on-2 format, and a bunch of unique fighting mechanics all in one game sounds fantastic, but for reasons we'll cover soon, this game ended up as a giant mess. Interestingly, Fighting Jam is part of the upcoming Capcom Fighting Collection 2, and this is what truly put the game on my radar, making me want to perform a deep dive into its history. Without further ado, let's explore the colourful, confusing, and sometimes mediocre world of Capcom Fighting Jam. Like most games with mixed critical reception, Capcom Fighting Jam went through an extremely troubled development cycle, and it's honestly a miracle that the game wasn't outright cancelled and left to rot in Capcom's basement. Before we cover the final game, it's important that we go way back to the very beginning of it all and see for ourselves how it came about. 2001's Capcom vs SNK 2 may be viewed as a fighting game of legends by today's standards, but unlike most beloved fighting games, it actually never received a sequel. According to the Polygon article Capcom vs SNK and Oral History, a potential Capcom vs SNK 3 was in development for the PS2 as a 3D fighting game, but after SNK's declaration of bankruptcy on October 30th, 2001, the project was quietly cancelled. With SNK staff members and their job security in a state of limbo, they had to decide how to progress from there, and while some of them formed DIMPs, the developers of games like Sonic Rush and Street Fighter IV, a group of around 20 joined Capcom. Perhaps the most important of them was Toyohisa Tanabe, and he states in Polygon's piece that the more experienced Capcom developers looked down on the new hires as they had yet to prove themselves. The goal of this new group was to create a fighting game that would wow audiences, but as developing a brand new fighter from scratch would take too much time and cost too much money, a crossover title that uses pre-existing assets and IPs was given priority. This idea ended up being the infamous Capcom Fighting Allstars, a game that was cancelled in 2003 due to overwhelmingly negative reception from fans during location tests, and according to fighting game community legend James Chen, I mean, everybody saw the footage of Capcom Fighting All-Stars, and it was kind of, even though it was their first official attempt to go 3D as an internally developed game using Street Fighter characters, a lot of people looked at it and were disappointed. I think that kind of contributed to the whole feeling that Capcom wasn't really going to make a lot of quality fighting games at that point in time, and people were just resigned to say, yeah, okay, whatever. Capcom wasn't the best anymore at making fighting games. They just weren't, and that expectation wasn't there. I remember when Capcom Fighting All-Stars first started showing up with footage from game magazines and Japanese game sites. People just looked at it and were like, this looks kind of bad, you know? And so when it was cancelled, I still kind of remember people just being like, yeah, it's probably for the better. Fighting All-Stars cancellation was but a mere symptom of an overarching disease, however, as the fighting game genre itself had been experiencing dwindling popularity over the past several years. Legendary Capcom artist Akira Yasuda explains, I think around the year 2000, Funamizu, Capcom's general producer at the time, told people who were working on fighting games to basically stop working on fighting games. Let's make something original, and it doesn't matter if it sells or not, we should do it anyway. I think there were also people in the lower levels of staff saying that Street Fighter is no longer selling, so we want to make something else that's not a fighting game. The Street Fighter Alpha series had been going on for a while and everyone was bored of that, and it didn't sell very well either. So I think this felt like the moment to try something new and go after a new challenge. The Street Fighter Wiki website reports a claim from former Street Fighter producer Yoshinori Ono that involves Fighting Jam essentially being a salvaged version of Fighting All-Stars, and that he was brought onto the game very late into development to help get it out the door. I unfortunately can't find the original source of this information, but if it is correct, then it reveals that Capcom didn't want to cancel 2 games in a row and have all that time and money wasted, even if it meant releasing a game that they knew wasn't amazing in a market that was growing tired of 2D fighting games. During my research, I stumbled across a page on Capcom's website that reveals a team based on Street Fighter 1 was planned to be in Fighting Jam. Retsu, Eagle, and a version of Sagat without the scar on his chest were set to be playable fighters, but they were scrapped for unknown reasons. Before release, anticipation for a brand new Capcom crossover fighter was at an all-time low, with James Chen once again stating, I remember when Capcom Fighting Jam first showed up at E3, and a lot of people were surprised. They were like, wow, they're making a new game? And then everyone looked at me. I was like, why does this game look so darn ugly? And that was such a prevailing feeling. Capcom Fighting Jam came out and was at E3, and everybody was like, oh. Even then, nobody seemed like they were really hype about it. It just didn't feel like there was going to be any hype for it. I just don't recall anyone seeing Capcom Fighting Jam and being like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to go to the arcade and try this out and all that stuff. Literally, I think everybody was like, whatever. At this point, we had all just kind of given up on hoping for more quality Capcom fighting games, really. It sucks to say, but that's really all the definitive information I can find regarding Fighting Jam. Many developer interviews about the game have simply been lost to time, and it's not like there are fans of the game who have archived its pre-release contents, but there's one more point of interest I'd like to mention. Like I mentioned in the intro, this one game has two different names, and I wanted to figure out the reason why. It's not as simple as doing a quick Google search, however, and after scouring through different resources, I stumbled across this message board that is seemingly older than Madonna. To cut a long story short, the thread creator cited an article where the writer apparently called Capcom USA's support hotline and was told by a worker that Capcom Fighting Jam was the game's working title, whereas Evolution was the final name. Another link in this post claims that the name change may be due to cultural differences between Europe and America. This may sound far-fetched at first, but perhaps the word jam would be taken literally in America? As in, Capcom are releasing a type of fighting jam for you to put on toast or something? Look, I'm not American myself, but I find it hard to believe that our friends in the US of A would have a hard time figuring out a figure of speech. Anyway, with Fighting Jam's development cycle involving cancelled projects, rushed deadlines, and a tasty breakfast spread, let's analyze its core gameplay. In typical Capcom fashion, Fighting Jam has 6 attack buttons. There are 3 punches and 3 kicks, and you can combine these with motion inputs to input command normal, special moves, supers, etc. But before we get into the more advanced techniques, it's very important to explain the game's universal basic mechanics. Trust me, this won't be as simple as you might think. Okay, you see how the character roster is split up into several games? This isn't just for show, as the characters in Fighting Jam bring over the universal mechanics from their games of origin. For example, because Ryu is in the Street Fighter 2 group, he can't air block, dash, or do anything fancy with his meter. You use it to perform supers and not much else. On the other hand, someone like Felicia can do pursuits, Magic Series combos, and DS moves, as these are common mechanics in Darkstalkers, and Street Fighter 3's Urien can super jump, dash, and parry. This means that when picking up a new character, you won't just have to learn their moves, but another set of gameplay mechanics. To make matters even more complicated, Fighting Jam is a 2-on-2 game, but it's not a tag fighter. As far as I can tell, there are no assists, team supers, or even a tag function. Instead, you get to choose which character you play as from the second round onwards. This means that you can select a point character who quickly builds meter and then use your second fighter to spend it in the next round, but if I'm being honest, I felt kind of underwhelmed by this feature. Capcom clearly knows how to make awesome tag team fighting games, so not having any real-time tag mechanics felt like a bit of a missed opportunity. This means that despite selecting 2 characters on the select screen, you only get to use 1 at a time, so for all intents and purposes, Fighting Jam is more or less a one-on-one fighting game. Going back to the different fighting styles now, if it sounds a bit confusing, I have a way to easily understand it. You know how Capcom vs SNK has the groove select that lets you choose which mechanics you'd like to operate under? Well, imagine if certain characters had pre-established grooves that cannot be removed or replaced. That's essentially how the battle system in Fighting Jam works, and I have mixed feelings. On one hand, it lets different types of Capcom fans experience multiple system mechanics in one package, but it also limits player creativity by literally placing characters into boxes that dictate how they function. As far as I can tell, there are no major universal system mechanics that tie all of these fighters together, and I'll go into more detail about this in a bit later on. On a more positive note, there are over 20 characters to choose from, and they all have their classic moves. From fireballs to command grabs to whatever this is, Fighting Jam provides the players with a lot of move variety, so if you love getting into the nitty-gritty with your favorite characters, you'll find a lot to like here. During my time in training mode, I opted to test Urien out, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that he has all 3 supers readily available. If you aren't aware, Street Fighter 3 makes you select 1 super for battle, but Fighting Jam just says screw it and gives you access to all of them at the same time. This lets Street Fighter 3 characters do combos and setups that are otherwise impossible, and I thought this was really awesome actually. If you're a big fan of older Capcom fighting games, especially ones that ran on the CPS3 arcade board, you'll particularly enjoy the inclusion of Red Earth characters. I made a video about this game around 7 decades ago, and it was great to play as Leo and friends again. They also have unique system mechanics that helps to separate them from the other groups, and they're some of my favorite fighters in the whole game. I also thought that Fighting Jam controlled very well, as I didn't experience dropped inputs, input delay, or anything egregious like that, so it does feel quite responsive overall. Aside from the character roster featuring fan-favorite characters and the gameplay feeling mostly intuitive, there's not much else I like if I'm being honest. Expanding on my previous statement about the characters and their mechanics, nothing in Fighting Jam feels very cohesive. It all kind of feels like a Mugen game you downloaded back in 2007 that didn't give a crap about game balance, leading to a very uneven and just kind of weird presentation. In my view, the roster doesn't have much rhyme or reason, and it feels like it was cobbled together at the last minute. You know that scene in South Park where the manatees make Family Guy jokes by using the balls underwater? Well, it feels like that's how Capcom decided on this game's roster. I understand that different characters having different mechanics helps to diversify the gameplay systems, but it also leads to certain groups having less options than others. I also tried searching for reputable tier lists to see which characters were better than others, but I wasn't able to find anything conclusive, although from watching competitive play on YouTube, I'm pretty sure that Anakaris is really busted. Also, I have to mention the character sprites. This is a whole can of worms in and of itself, but I noticed some issues right away. Seemingly all of the characters have missing animation frames when compared to their source material, leading to less impactful and smooth animation. This may have been due to time or memory constraints, which I can sympathize with, but it also dampens the title's quality. Perhaps the worst offender, however, is seemingly how every sprite has been taken from just some random Capcom game. You know the meme about Morrigan always having the same Darkstalkers 1 sprite in every game she appears in? Well, Fighting Jam is like that, but on steroids, and I can describe it all in one word: inconsistency. Ryu, Bison, Guile, and Zangief are grouped under the Street Fighter 2 category, but these sprites are from Capcom vs SNK 2, and these sprites are from Street Fighter Alpha. When compared to older sprites like those from Darkstalkers 1, the difference in quality is night and day, and it only gets worse when Red Earth's CPS 3 sprites are on the screen. This mishmash of sprite art leads to the whole game being aesthetically inconsistent, and it's my largest criticism of Fighting Jam's presentation. Because of the inconsistent game mechanics and sprites, it can often feel like you and your opponent are playing completely different games, resulting in a massive disconnect. Going from one art style to another in arcade mode felt like tonal whiplash, and it means that there's no solid, consistent aesthetic that ties the whole game together. Even the stages look weird, as they feature two-dimensional backgrounds with many NPCs, many of which should have been playable. Older Capcom games feature stages that are really rich with background detail and color that perfectly match the styles of the playable fighters in the foreground, and no such thing occurs in Fighting Jam. Look, I know that I'm beating a dead horse here, but experiencing this all for myself when I was recording footage was instantly noticeable, and I just couldn't ignore it. No matter how much I played, I couldn't stop noticing how contradictory everything seemed to be. This was no doubt a result of time and budget limitations, however, and I believe that with a friendlier schedule, the developers would have instantly fixed these issues. Speaking of a tight budget, yep, this is literally all the content that Fighting Jam has to offer. Arcade mode, versus mode, and training mode. There's no color edit, online play, combo trials, mission mode, etc., just these 3 modes. Soul Calibur this is not, but I'm sure that we can have some fun despite this menu being blander than my cooking. After selecting your 2 favorite characters in arcade mode, you battle through 5 stages against AI-controlled opponents before reaching one of 2 final bosses. Pyron from Darkstalkers and Shin Akuma from Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo are the villains here, and you can even unlock them as playable characters, which is actually really cool. After becoming victorious, you're presented with your character's ending, and these sequences are some of the worst I've ever seen in any Capcom fighter. The artwork, which I believe was created by Udon, the studio behind the Street Fighter comic book series, does look pretty nice, but it haphazardly slides around the screen in an attempt to finish the game's non-existent narrative. Seriously, I have no idea what half of these are trying to properly convey, especially because none of the fighters have any intros that explain why they're battling in the first place. There's also a lack of text or voice acting, and these ending sequences feel very amateur as a result. As far as I know, there are no secret boss fights or different endings for certain characters, so arcade mode ends up becoming very linear and predictable. I found myself getting bored while playing through it, and it made me long for other fighting games released around the same time with extra features in their arcade ladders. Moving on, versus mode is how you fight against other people, and it's about what you'd expect. There's nothing here that's really out of the ordinary, but it does get the job done, and this leaves us with training mode. Getting to practice combos and setups on a training dummy of your choice does sound nice, but there are a few major exclusions. The game doesn't provide you with lots of control options for the dummy, so good luck if you ever want to practice something really specific. But the biggest omission I noticed was a lack of command lists. I don't know if I'm just blind and I can't see it here, but it looks to me like there's no way to view your character's move list in the game. So in order to view what moves my characters have, I have to look them up online. I don't know if this was just an oversight on the developer's part, but it does feel quite weird to not have a command list in a fighting game. Some of the fighters also have extensive move lists with really unorthodox character mechanics, so it would have been great to view how they work in training mode itself. To be perfectly honest, Fighting Jam is very lackluster for those expecting a strong single-player experience with lots of content to keep you coming back over time, as it feels like after you've played the game for 5 minutes, you've kind of seen all that it has to offer. There's only so many times one can blitz through arcade mode without it becoming tedious, and this is arguably the greatest flaw regarding the title's content. So many fighting games from this period had extensive single-player offerings that would keep players hooked, but Fighting Jam is unfortunately the polar opposite of these other games. I believe that if Fighting Jam had a less stressful development cycle, more content would definitely have been included, but as it stands today, this menu is almost completely barren. I've never had this much trouble writing about a game's modes before, and as we've covered all of them, I'm simply out of things to say. Buying this game at full price back in the day would definitely have led to player frustration, and I can imagine that lots of players would have traded in their copies to buy other games. With everything we've gone through up until this point, it'd be no surprise to find out that Capcom Fighting Jam received a very critical reception upon release. The PS2 and Xbox versions have scores of 57 and 61 on Metacritic respectively, and after reading through multiple reviews for myself, I noticed many common points of criticism. For starters, the character roster wasn't appreciated all that much, as there are many notable exclusions. Alex and Yoon are cool, I guess, but to include them over iconic fighters like Ken and Morrigan left a sour taste in the mouths of many Capcom fans. On the flip side, it's awesome to see Red Earth here, especially because Leo, my favorite character from that game, is playable, but I would also have loved to have seen Tessa. Having two monsters be playable is really cool though, and seeing Karate Man Ryu fight against a literal dragon monster is something that will never get old. Other than that, I have one more personal gripe. God only knows how many IPs Capcom owns, so to have half of Fighting Jam's roster be Street Fighter representatives is a very predictable choice. And look, I love Street Fighter more than I love Oxygen, but I would have also loved to have seen other series like Resident Evil or Plasma Sword be featured here. Jill and Hayato already have completed sprites in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and if you really need a team of 3, just, I don't know, put them with Kyosuke from CVS 2 and call them Team Oddballs or something. I understand that using pre-existing characters allowed the developers to reuse animations, audio, attack properties, etc. under the game's tight development deadline, but the roster does feel undercooked as a result. Going back to CVS 2 for a moment, many reviewers unfavorably compared these two titles, and I totally understand why. If you were in the market for a crossover fighting game featuring multiple Capcom characters, you'd be better off grabbing this game. It has more characters, smoother animation, and a more inspired soundtrack, and Fighting Jam simply ends up playing second fiddle. As I mentioned earlier, most of this game's contents feel copy-pasted from earlier Capcom fighters, and this was arguably what reviewers disliked the most about Fighting Jam. GamePro stated that they felt the game was too routine to stand out in the crowded fighting game market, and Hardcore Gamer magazine even stated that, with Capcom Fighting Evolution, Capcom brought a knife to a gunfight. The word evolution usually means that something gets better with each new revision. CFE is inferior to essentially every other game in its genre that's come out in the past few years. If you want to have a thoroughly miserable time, keep an eye out for Capcom Fighting Evolution. It's the video game equivalent of poking yourself in the eyes. Ouch, that's pretty rough. But with how lacking Capcom Fighting Jam can be, I definitely feel the reviewer's pain. Aside from early 2000s print reviews, discussion surrounding the game was revived with the introduction of online message boards, and even on sites like Reddit and GameFAQs, you'd be hard-pressed to not find unhappy fans dunking on the game. It's very, very, very easy to find even more review scores and quotes filled with displeasure, but you get the idea by now. So I'll sum it all up by saying that virtually all aspects of this title received intense criticism from reviewers. By 2004, Capcom's reputation in the fighting game world was as good as peanut butter and jelly, so when they released something that wasn't up to par with their previous work, the sudden drop in quality was immediately noticed. As far as the title's legacy goes, it doesn't have a giant or impactful one, but there's still some interesting things to mention. The game itself was rarely mentioned by Capcom after its release, but newcomer Ingrid made her way into Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max on PSP, and iconography related to her can also be found in Street Fighter V. She also appeared in pre-release screenshots of Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, was considered to be in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and was even playable in Project Cross Zone 2, just to name a few of her appearances. This next thing isn't 100% confirmed as of me making this video, but a leaker who accurately predicted Street Fighter 6's Season 2 DLC claims that Ingrid will be a playable fighter in Season 3, but only time will tell if this is true or not. It's clear to everybody that despite not loving Fighting Jam, Capcom seems to love Ingrid, as they'll put her in all sorts of games to tease fans about future possibilities involving her character. The next official appearance for not just Ingrid but also her friends here is in the aforementioned Capcom Fighting Collection 2. Despite this title overall not being the best, to say the least, I'm excited to give it a go with a modern training mode and rollback netcode, so hopefully these will make the game more enjoyable? I highly doubt it, but I'm still looking forward to its inclusion in this collection because of game preservation reasons. With all of that being said, it goes without saying that Capcom Fighting Jam is severely lacking in almost all fronts, and aside from its awesome soundtrack, there's not much here that I'm in love with. I hate to be a negative person in my videos, and despite my constant criticism, I understand that the game's rushed nature was, again, a result of time and budget limitations, but it makes me wonder about how fantastic Fighting Jam could have been in a better world. Throwing all these characters together with unique gameplay mechanics sounds like a recipe for success, but Capcom unfortunately missed the landing by about 200 miles, and it's not very addictive as a result. The whole game feels like a giant missed opportunity, and I see it as one of Capcom's greatest what-ifs. Despite this, I really hope Fighting Jam sees a resurgence of sorts via the Capcom Fighting Collection 2, as the game now has native online play and a hitbox viewer in training mode. These will allow so many more learning resources to be created, and I look forward to FGC veterans playing the game in 2025 and beyond in potential tournaments at majors. I guarantee you that even more fighting game content creators on YouTube will also extensively cover the game, and I'm sure this will be really fun. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you very, very much for watching. I appreciate your time and I hope you had a lot of fun. Take care and I'll see you in the next one.